cutting away a little bit from the nature of warfare. If we speak about terrorist attacks, they have been happening for the last 50 years of human history at least. Perhaps a little longer than that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. What's the history of terrorism? I mean, if you define it most broadly, to say terrorism is defined as a theory that allows you to use terror as an instrument to achieve some aim, then that's been, it's been around for thousands of years, right? The Mongols would utterly destroy a town and create a pile of skulls in order to send a message to all the other towns that you're better off surrendering. It's a form of terror, right? It's to say, my aim is to create such fear that you accept some stance that I'm taking. So in that sense, it's been around forever. But I think what you meant was more this modern form of terrorism. And the modern form of terrorism is effectively, I think, has been around since the Second World War, in some shape or form.
Civilian targets.
And infrastructure targets, and so you had the IRA during the Troubles in Ireland, the Irish Republican Army, which conducted terrorist attacks, depending on who you speak to, in England to protest against the occupation of some part of Ireland. And obviously you've got the massive history of asymmetric warfare or militancy or insurgency or terrorism as a tactic being used in the Middle East right through the 20th century.
They have their hands on drone technology. I wonder how that changes the security concerns of civilian targets like you and me.
Yeah,
or the listeners. Because, I mean, the fear over the last 20 years was, could there be a bomb blast in my city? Especially when we were growing up in Mumbai.
it was bomb blasts, right?
We were actually very afraid. I remember almost like,
Train and Gateway of India and
you'd hear this at least once a year that there's a red alert.
absolutely.
Has there been a blast in that part of town? We have seen few bomb blasts like in Bangalore. But all in all, India feels much safer than it used to in the 2000s. That time the fear was bombs, but I'm thinking that if drones are now so much cheaper, so much more deployable, etc., it's suddenly kind of dangerous again, theoretically speaking. That's one aspect of it. Secondly, I don't know whether it was you or someone else on the show, but they mentioned something about the Chinese firewall. That countries may have to adopt firewalls across the geography of the country to prevent drone-based terrorism.
By firewall, do you mean a digital firewall?
Yeah.
Well, so that might actually be necessary if you want to avoid the ultimate doomsday, which is that you are entirely dependent on unmanned platforms, and then those platforms get hacked just before a conflict.
Like the pager blast.
Right. I mean, imagine if you've got all these sophisticated drones, and just before a war, all of your drones stop functioning because they've been hacked. So that's probably the firewall conversation. But to your broader point about what happens when malicious actors get their hands on this kind of technology, and it's a risk, Ranveer, that we've always run. I mean, I'd argue that one of the greatest risks that we continue to run today in India is the risk of a Pakistani collapse. Because if the Pakistani state collapses, you have a nuclear state collapsing. If a nuclear state collapses, the quality of its nuclear security becomes extremely compromised. I can see more than one pathway to a rogue element ending up getting their hands on a small thermonuclear warhead in the chaos of a Pakistani state collapse. So one of my real nightmare scenarios is a Pakistani state collapse, which, so that's the kind of risk. The point I'm trying to make is that terrorists getting their hands on extremely advanced, large-scale weapons has always been a risk, whether it's a nuclear weapon, whether it's a chemical or biological weapon. Terrorists unleashing a biological weapon in a city. What could be more effective than that, right? Polluting the water supply of a major metro. What could be more effective than that, right? So you've got these risks that the world has always run. And so the answer very much is to focus on those individuals, in my view, and those groups, and to be using intelligence much before an attack actually gets planned or executed in order to, have a much more proactive security stance, right? Especially in this and that's why Mossad's a great example, right? I mean, they don't wait. They are tracking groups, individuals, actors years before they might actually try to do something vis-a-vis Israel. And I think that under this regime, since 2014, in India as well, we've taken a much more proactive national security stance. I don't think it's any more limited just to protecting, say, installations or particular metros. I think that, and it's always a holistic approach when we to national security. I mean, it's not just about creating a physical barrier on the border, but you also need drones patrolling. You also need human intelligence. You also need your espionage networks in the region. You also need the ability to troll for data on dark parts of the internet, and so on and so forth, right? So I mean, you really need a whole of government effort in order to be able to protect a country, given how complicated the world's become in 2024, right? It's just no longer about
And how porous.
exactly.
I feel the internet has made the world much more porous. Therefore, our sense of security and safety has also become more porous and penetrable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is a real risk. Now, the specific risk of drone technology or battlefield AI technology in the hands of terrorists, I think is an interesting question. I think we're seeing some of it for the first time in the recent bout of. I mean, we saw it on the 7th of October, as I mentioned already, when Hamas used very unsophisticated but very effective drone tactics against the extremely technologically sophisticated IDF, right? I mean, a Merkava tank. I'll give you this example because a very famous video from the 7th of October attacks where they these drones have little cameras on them, right? They're the wedding photography drones. So they already have a camera. They already have a remote unit, right? They pointed the camera down. They're looking at a Merkava tank, one of the most advanced tanks in the world with active armor. You know what active armor is? The armor senses a projectile coming towards it and actively tries to intercept it before it hits the tank. That's the Merkava. That's the level of sophistication that the Israeli armor has. These guys went right to the top of it, found an open hatch. This Israelis was wondering what the hell's going on and dropped a grenade into the tank and disabled it. Completely ridiculous, and a great example of Jugadu use of technology to achieve an asymmetric success against a much more sophisticated player. The other thing worth mentioning and should be of serious note to our armed forces, and I'm sure it is the fact that they have experienced drones being used by militants in Kashmir in this latest bout over the last couple of months that has occurred, as well as other forms of extremely advanced, weapons and equipment. And so, I think that one of the risks that we need to think about is how will terrorist outfits end up being more effective because they'll use drones during attacks, right, to support their own attack, to have better information on the battlefield vis-a-vis the security forces, just like we've been talking about. But the other one is when this technology really becomes dangerous when we're in the wrong hands is when it becomes that swarm of bees that you talked about, right? If the technology that allows you to program 500 tiny drones that are capable of moving really fast to go into an area and just kinetically strike every civilian they see. If you can do that, and if a terrorist group unleashes that kind of drone attack on a city, that's mass terror like we've never experienced before, right? Unnamed drones coming out of nowhere to and there's an incredible short film that was made on exactly this topic that I would encourage your viewers to watch as well. I think it's a 10 or 12 minute YouTube documentary. Maybe we can add the link, that really paints this picture. So over the next couple of decades, I think we'll end up in a situation where even the battlefield AI technology, which is, the software part of this, which is still difficult, complex, advanced, only a few companies in the world, largely in the US or in Israel, are really talking about and able to deploy real battlefield AI. 10 years from now, AI itself is going to mature enough that someone somewhere is going to be able to develop something that allows drones to operate in swarms. And the moment that happens, and that's in the hands of a non-state actor, you're now looking at one more source of risk in an, already pretty risky world.
The nature of warfare and terrorism is fully changing, becoming much more creative, much more brain-based, much more strategic, and a little unhumanized.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Humans are moving out of the picture.
We continue to remain the victims of it in many ways, and there are real ethical questions, Ranveer, that I think it's also my responsibility to mention. If we put terrorism aside for a minute, even within formal state armed forces, there's a significant ethical question attached to this idea that I've dropped of battlefield AI. And the ethical question is this: how comfortable are we, Ranveer? And we should ask your viewers, how comfortable are they with the thought of a machine making a kill decision about a human being? See, even right now, there's a pilot in Nevada who's looking at a screen and deciding whether a Predator or a Reaper drone is going to drop a missile on a terrorist in Afghanistan, let's say. Right? Even now, there's a human being who has to make that decision. And there are some rules that they follow, and they have to have enough evidence that that is a terrorist, and they'll try to minimize the civilian casualties. And you've got a process that allows you to justify that this was a necessary move. We've minimized collateral damage, and we had to take this terrorist out. But imagine a world in which that remote pilot also is replaced. He's no longer there. He's lost his job. And that drone's making that decision itself. Is that guy a terrorist? Is that object that he just took out an AK or, I don't know, his walking stick or whatever, right? So if that decision starts to get made by machines, what are the ethical implications of that?
And that's a reality that we're heading towards.
And remember, Ranveer, there is a moral landscape to war as well. We shouldn't consider war to be somehow this place where everything is immoral or everything is amoral. Not at all. If you speak to a soldier, he'll tell you the same thing. He'll say morality is extremely important in war. There's a morality obviously attached to your loyalty and your determination and your commitment to your own side and to your own unit and to your own, guys and all that. But there's also a morality vis-a-vis the enemy. There's a morality vis-a-vis civilians, whether they're yours or theirs. And all of this is enshrined in international law as well. That's why we have public international law. That's why we have the Geneva Convention. That's why we have such a thing as rules of war. I mean, it sounds kind of nuts, but as human beings, we've decided that even war has to be slightly ritualized. There's some things you just don't do. And so I think it's a huge ethical question that we're going to have to grapple with. That if we're comfortable right now, it's because we believe fundamentally in the goodness of man, right? And we believe that Ranveer standing there in front of a bunch of even Pakistani civilians is probably not going to choose to gun them down just cause, right? But if a machine malfunctions or if a machine makes a wrong decision, who's responsible? See, right now, if there are war crimes, in theory, there are investigations. We hold people responsible. We put people into jail, including our own troops sometimes, right? I mean, we've had investigations under AFSPA or otherwise in Kashmir about human rights violations, etc., even by the Indian Army, right? I mean, I'm not afraid to admit it that there are such accusations. Of course, other armed forces have done much, much worse during battlefield situations. And sometimes those crimes go unreported, but oftentimes they do get reported and you do have some sort of legal mechanism. But what happens if there's no human being to hold responsible? Are you going to prosecute a machine? You see how the ethical questions become
layered. If you enjoyed this clip from The Ranveer Show, we've uploaded a ton of other clips related to a ton of other topics. So explore the channel because there's something for everyone.